Hello, welcome to Ultimate Talk, our weekly look at the world of the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Got a cracking night lined up for you tonight. We'll speak to Matt Serra, who's counting down to his fight against Matt Hughes.
We'll also grab a word with Michael Bisping, who's in training for Dan Henderson at UFC 100.
And remember last week, Dana White told us Chuck Liddell had fought his last fight in the UFC. Tonight, we'll ask, is there a way back for the Iceman?
So, plenty to get through, and this week we're joined by Gareth A. Davis of the Daily Telegraph, and also, very shortly, we'll be joined by an Ultimate Fighting Championship fan, DJ Christian O'Connell.
Making his debut in the studio tonight.
Yes, Gareth's frightened him off for the moment, but he will be here shortly. Don't worry about that.
And remember, it's your show too, so don't forget to email us at the usual address, views@setanta.com, or you can send us a text on 60300. Don't forget, texts are charged at your standard network rate.
And also, don't forget, we want your fantasy fight suggestions. We've got a PS3, Xbox 360 and copies of the new UFC game, Undisputed, to give away. We want to know which two fighters would make up your fantasy fight from any time in UFC history. Any weight, any era. We've had hundreds and hundreds of suggestions. Keep them coming in, and we'll be announcing the winners next week. Gareth, your thoughts on that. We've spoken to you about it before, but your ultimate fantasy fight ever?
Chuck Liddell against Royce Gracie after having met him in here maybe 5 years ago.
More importantly, do you think it's a fight that might ever happen in the realms?
No.
You, of course, were at
no,
the home
only
of
on
UFC
UFC 2009, the Xbox game. It'll only ever happen on there.
That will do for us. We'll have a game.
Yeah.
I'll be Royce, you can be the Iceman.
OK, you're on.
It is a fight. You're not alone in that suggestion, by the way, so we'll see. Right, let's start. Let's take a look at the stories that are making the headlines this week. There have been several fighters cut from the UFC this week, including Jason Day and David Loiseau. That means a new opponent for Xavier Foucault, who will now face Drew McFedries.
Shell Sonnen has also been confirmed as Yushi Okami's replacement to fight Dan Miller at UFC 98. Okami has been forced out with a knee injury.
Another fighter ruled out of UFC 98 is Houston Alexander. Alexander was scheduled to take on Andre Gusmao, but has been sidelined by a broken hand. Krzysztof Sosinski will now fight Gusmao.
And Chuck Liddell's mentor, John Hackleman, has contradicted Dana White's claim on the show last week that the Iceman has fought his last fight. Hackleman claims that Liddell has more than one fight left in him at the top level. Gareth, you've been quite vocal on this over the past few months, really. You've always said when a man is finished, he knows he needs to bow out at the top. Hackleman now thinks that perhaps the Iceman has one more fight in him.
Yeah, I've got the comment here from John Hackleman. You know, he's Chuck Liddell's long-time trainer. And he's saying just on his abilities, his skill and his power and what he has left, I think he has more than one fight left in him. Not just one fight, more than one fight left in him. Maybe his game isn't what it was 10 years ago, I don't know. But he's definitely still at the top of the food chain. That's a worrying thing to hear, I think. Because, you know, I think once of fighters, I've said this so many times, I saw it in Vegas last week with Ricky Hatton. I know it's a different sport. Once a fighter's...
The principle's the same, though.
The principle is the same, certainly with striking. You know, and the tiny little 4-ounce gloves that they use in MMA. Once a fighter's resistance, once the neurological process in the brain to the chin is saying, I go to sleep when I'm hit, the punch resistance is gone. It doesn't matter what their conditioning's like. They're on the slide from that point, and it becomes dangerous for them. It's not good to be knocked out.
But also, let's not forget, I mean, whatever anyone says, Dana White is the most powerful person involved here, and if he says that's it for Chuck, that is it, surely.
Well, it is, yeah, but remember, there's lots of organisations that would still pay Chuck to go and fight, to lead a card, but we don't want to see that. We don't want Chuck resembling anything to do with, you know, I mean, I don't want to say the wrestler with Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler, but the last thing we want to see is Chuck headlining not at the top of the very sport, because this is a guy who's helped develop the sport over the last 8 years and become a legend worldwide. And, you know, my view was, as I said a couple of weeks ago, the best thing for him to do would be installed as a Hall of Famer at UFC 100, and that he takes on a role, perhaps with someone like Matt Serra, who we'll talk to later, about trying to get the UFC regulated and permission for a commission to regulate UFC in New York.
Well, Gareth, thank you for going. Christian has joined us now. Very good to see you this evening.
Thank you very much for
making your debut in the studio.
I know, and whilst you were chatting about a legend that is Chuck Liddell.
Well, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, his manager says he thinks he's still got a fight left in him. Dana White's saying that's it. He told us on the show last week, that's it for Chuck. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if you love UFC, then you love Chuck and Randy. Those people, along with the Gracies, built the whole empire. And if you really care about the great fights, his last couple of fights have not been the great Chuck Liddell, and no one wants to remember him in a bad way. I think there's someone who's got a big job to do around the world selling UFC. He's still the big poster boy for it, you know, and I've been to some of his sort of exhibitions he does and stuff like that. I think he's got a huge role to play in selling it all over the world, but in terms of putting on a great performance in a fight now, I think his best is gone. But he's made enough money, and the crowd still love seeing him at the events. But, yeah, I don't think anyone wants to see him washed up, and like a lot of heavyweight boxers do when they always have their comeback, and it's never, ever the same. No. So I think I'd rather remember from when he was the most devastating fighter around and knocking people out all of his fights.
Christian, let's talk a bit about you. Growing army of fans. Are we talking to a writer, a broadcaster, a DJ? What do you prefer as your biog these days?
I think gun for hire. I think...
I like that.
So it's Christian Gun for Hire O'Connell?
Yeah. That's what I prefer, yeah. To be honest, yeah, a bit of all of those. And, you know, I've watched this show, so I'm really happy to be here. I can't believe we're allowed to just chat about MMA for an hour.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you.
If you start talking in an hour, we'll tell you to shut up because we go off air in half an hour.
What? Oh, see, right, okay.
So get the good points in.
Yeah, sure.
Where's your love of MMA come from? What enticed you into the sport? I mean, you talk about Chuck Liddell there, so does your love for it go a long way back, or was this a more recent thing for you?
When I was a kid, I was really into martial arts, and I still am now. And I grew up, my dad was a big boxing fan. And when I was growing up, it was Tyson came on the scene as a sort of young, exciting heavyweight, sort of 17, 18, 19, and the youngest world heavyweight champion. But then the last couple of years, boxing is nowhere near as good as it used to be. It's not as exciting. Heavyweight division's virtually dead, really, in the world. And so I sort of drifted into this thing called UFC, which was so exciting. And I've been to a couple of them as well. You know, if you love combat sports and love boxing, I think, especially in America now, there are a lot of people. Those fights on pay-per-view are massive now. And you know what it's like with a big boxing fight? You're not always guaranteed it's going to be a fantastic fight, whereas if you go to a UFC event, you've got so many fights, you're always guaranteed either a good knockout, a good scrap, or a really good submission.
Do you remember, was it Big Daddy Wrestling? Were you that era on a Saturday
Yes.
lunchtime?
It always seemed to be Dickie Davis.
Yes.
Who I interviewed a couple of years ago, and he said he hated the wrestling. I just presumed he loved it. And I did watch it. It always seemed to be live from Reading.
Yes.
I went to a Lord's Taverners cricket dinner at Lord's the other day. Mick McManus was there.
Wow.
Yeah. It was, you know, with his hair still glued on, you know.
They need to
and
bring
it was
him out of
unbelievable.
retirement,
He looked
put
about
him up against
150.
Chuck Liddell.
No, he looked about 150.
Still do. He's still got the magic. They used to come out with chubby grip on and stuff
They
like that.
did. That was slightly concerning.
And then
wasn't
then the commentators would go, because there's a pantomime even then,
yeah.
and they would go, oh, I hope he doesn't attack his bad knee. And the moment the referee was distracted, he'd be like punching his chubby grip. As a kid, you'd be like, no, he's hurt his leg.
Listen, you've clearly done your research on this subject. You could actually win one of our Xbox or 360 games. We're asking the viewers, who would your favourite all-time fight be? You can pick anyone you like. I know George St. Pierre's one of your all-time favourites.
Fantastic.
All-time favourite fight, any two guys from any era. Don't say Big Daddy, because great fella, but you know.
I think I'd go with the current state of UFC right now. I'd be really interested to see someone like Anderson Silva go up against someone like Machida. I think he's a fantastic, really exciting fighter.
Well, that could happen.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they train together as well,
Yeah.
but I think that eventually both those guys are so dominant, they're going to have to fight each other at some point in the next year or two.
The thing about Machida, Gareth, you might be able to tell me, I'm sure you wrote this. Between fights, doesn't he drink his own...
Yeah, well, I
Machida?
got a lot of flack for going on this the last time. Peagate, yeah, he does,
Yeah.
you know, he waters down his own pee and drinks a little bit every day for something to do with the electrolytes in his system, helps the system, but...
I'm sure there's other ways
you know,
of getting
well,
electrolytes.
but I tell you what, it's enabled him to never lose a round in a UFC fight anyway.
think that's why he never loses a
Probably
round?
not. It's probably got something to do with his brilliant karate and his skills, you know, and the way he knows his range.
Yeah, it's really exciting to watch.
As I left Las Vegas on Monday, it's funny, they were taking the ring down from the MGM Grand, the kind of entrance hall, the huge entrance hall to the MGM Grand, where obviously Ricky Hatton and Manny Pacquiao have been fighting, and they were already installing the posters for Machida and Evans. They're all going up, and I think, you know, May the 23rd, I think it is, UFC 98. That's a great fight.
Yeah, it is.
It's a great mix of styles. I mean, it could go pear-shaped.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I mean, they could really stand off each other, but it's one of those ones that, as fans, we get very excited about, I think.
It's one of the most exciting sort of, if you're really into MMA and you really appreciate, you know, when they're doing it really well and they're athletes, then I think those two, Evans and Machida, I think could be fight of the year.
You talked about Machida there. What other fighters have caught your eye? I mean, we've got a lot of great British fighters coming through now. I mean, Dan Hardy's always been put up as a great prospect. What do you make of British fighters, and who else has caught your eye so
I think
far?
Bisping's been really good for UFC in this country, and watching The Ultimate Fighter,